Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and welcome to my review of Excession by Iain M. Now, before we get started, I will say I like this book, so if that's all you wanted to know, there you go, because in order to talk about this book, I will need to essentially spoil everything. I will be discussing relevant plot details, so here's your warning. Go no further if you don't want the book ruined. So first things first, there are two things I really look for in sci-fi. The first thing is an interesting plot. Now, honestly, I look for that in all books, but it's still relevant here. The second thing is ideas or hypotheticals which make me think. I'm not sure what it is about sci-fi, but it brings forth notions of the future and how we as people should approach situations or evolve, or what wondrous things we may come across as we spread among the stars. And so it is with a heavy heart that I say that Excession fails at the first thing, but succeeds with the second. Allow me to set the scene. And by set the scene, I mean ruin the entire plot. So Gunnar Hofwin is a man of culture who gets called upon by special circumstances, essentially the culture spy network, in order to perform a task. Quick note, the culture is the name of the race that the books revolve around. Anyway, this task, as described to him, goes as follows. Thousands of years ago, when the culture was younger and traveling through the stars, a ship came across an unknown object floating in space. This object could not be identified, and when the ship detected an engine fault, it released all its satellites to monitor it and moved to a station in order to effect repairs. The next ship to arrive took 3 years, and by the time it got there, the object, as well as all the satellites and recording equipment, had vanished without a trace. When the original ship got to port, it was discovered that the engine fault was due to a malicious attack. After this event, the ship and all its drones left the culture and have not been heard from since. Additionally, of the crew that was on board the ship at the time of the event, half opted for immortality, and the other half opted for auto-euthanasia. In the subsequent decades, every person who became immortal died, except for one. Gart Kepelessa Zrain Enhof Tramau Afayaf Dam Niskat, or Zrain for short, was the captain of the vessel which found the orb. She chose to put herself into storage. Unfortunately, her body was blown up during an attack centuries earlier, but her consciousness and personality was preserved on a ship known as the Sleeper Service. So Burr's job is to get to the Sleeper Service and get in touch with Zrain so that the culture can figure out just what the heck is up with the orb and why it led to all those involved leaving the culture or killing themselves. And why is this so important? Because the orb has reappeared. This is an amazing hook. I'm all on board figuring out this mystery and the reasons behind all these deaths. Unfortunately, it's all either unexplained, vague, or just a red herring. Here's the reality as we learn over the course of the novel. Decades ago, Burr loved a woman named Dajale, and they decided to have some children together. Burr cheated on her, though by culture standards that's not really a thing, and Dajale went crazy, tried to murder Burr, killed Burr's unborn child. At this point, Burr is female, and they separated. Dajale, also pregnant, halted her pregnancy and went to live on the Sleeper Service. The Sleeper Service, having been involved in allowing Burr to follow Dajale to a water planet where the events unfolded, wanted a resolution to their conflict and therefore in order to get its cooperation with the orb, demands that Burr is brought to the Sleeper Service in order to resolve the dispute between Burr and Dajale. That's the whole point. That murder mystery setting? Dropped. Did it happen? We don't know. What we do know is that Zrain was a real person. She even gets revived at the end of the book, but we're never told if the story that was sold to Burr to get into the Sleeper Service is real or not. When asked, Sleeper Service states that Zrain has an interesting story, but not one that Sleeper Service suggested be told to Burr. So did all that stuff thousands of years ago happen? Who knows? There's even a dream that Sleeper Service gets the Grey Area, another ship, to implant into Burr while he sleeps that shows Zrain not being loved by her parents and being swallowed by the orb. Really intriguing stuff, but it's all pointless. Did that happen? We don't know, because Sleeper Service wants to get Burr and Dajale to make up and have Dajale bring the baby she's put on hold for 40 years to term. What a letdown. It's literally Sleeper Service putting his affairs in order. That being said, there is a bunch of universe-defining events going on as well. War is breaking out between the culture and the Affront, with the orb at the center, and there are a lot of intricacies involved, but all of that pales to the amazing hook that's presented around the orb, and that doesn't matter at all. So that's why the plot itself failed me. But let's move on to ideas. This book is great at that. About a year ago, the trolley problem was all the rage, probably helped along by the show The Good Place, but it's a situation that makes you contemplate what you would do if put in that position. And that's what we get in Excession. For instance, there's a moment when the Affront first declare war and start breaking into a culture embassy. The mind that resides there has two choices. He must destroy himself to prevent the Affront from getting access to the information in the embassy, but he can either destroy himself and the embassy, causing minimal damage, or full-on self-destruct, killing everyone on the station. The mind chooses the former, but it's interesting to imagine what you would do in that situation. You know that the culture are so much more advanced than the Affront that this attack is like being hit with sticks when you have nukes, but for this one engagement, you know you'll lose. What the Affront are doing is futile, but do you limit the loss of life, or do you reap havoc and vengeance down upon them for the senseless loss of life they're about to initiate? I will say that I'm not big on hard science. When the book starts with long explanations about how a mind is created with organic and cybernetic parts, my eyes glaze over. I don't care. The same with scientific principles. I'll openly admit that physics was my worst science class, to the degree that while taking physics in university, I was put in the class with an additional hour and a half a week since I didn't take it in high school, and our professor literally called our class of 300 kids useless idiots. Which means that when I read this stuff, I know I'm dumb enough to not know if it's true or not, so I can easily trust the author with what he's saying. Which means that these scientific theories, whether possible or not, are still fun for me to think about. For example, it gets stated that the orb is able to pass through universes and time. Imagine a bubble. And within that bubble is another bubble, and another, going on forever. The orb can move between the bubbles where no one else can. And it gets brought up that if we had access to that technology, where would we go? Would we move up to older bubbles and see what life exists there and their advancements? Or do we move down to newer universes to observe new life being formed? Or do we act as gods, influencing that new life that will spawn? Do you risk going up and reaching a universe that has already ended? How far do you go? I have no clue if that's feasible, a consistent hypothesis on the nature of the universes, or just made up baloney, but just thinking about what I would do if I had the ability is really interesting to me, and what makes sci-fi so great. So now gripes, not including obviously the plot-related one that I started this video off with. So throughout this novel, there are a bunch of ships who are part of a group talking to each other. Within this group, there are conspirators and non-conspirators. As the book progresses, some ships leave the group, some members within the group break off into a smaller group, and so on. Except I didn't follow who was who during this book, because organizing who said what was a blatant waste of my time. Imagine you have 10 people. Fred, George, Bob, Mike, Dave, Jeff, Paul, James, Graham, and Grover. You're given no defining features of any of these people, and all they do is have conversations among each other. Sometimes you aren't even sure who's talking. Without a fully conscious effort, which may or may not include a list you write yourself, can you keep them straight in your mind? Now replace those normal names with Attitude Adjuster, No Fixed Abode, Different Tan, Not Invented Here, Steely Glint, Shoot Them Later, Serious Callers Only, Anticipation of a New Lover's Arrival, The, Tactical Grace, Lumivorous, and more. It's not worth the hassle. In fact, here's the Reddit post which puts it all in order for us. Now remember, for the most part, all they do is talk to each other. They don't actually do anything. But don't worry, when they have conversations, we get timestamps, which are shown like so. Enjoy reading them and committing them to memory. Super interesting stuff here. But don't worry, because certain events in the novel, including these conversations, take place out of chronological order. Better be able to keep it all straight. Now I will stress that our main plot for the most part still all makes sense. I was never lost with what Burr was doing, but this conspiracy stuff is so obtuse and easily dismissed without making a conscious effort to keep it all straight that it wasn't worth it to me. Ultimately, I still consider this book a worthwhile read. The major failing was simply that the great mystery presented ended up being way more interesting than what we got. I'm currently in the process of reading another culture novel, so I'll be sure to review that once I'm done. In the meantime, I will be releasing another sci-fi review as a counterpoint to this novel next, so look forward to that. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and have a good day.